Hello everyone. Today I'd like to share Korea's experience in building a competence-based TIVA system, focusing on the National Competence Standards we call NCS and the National Qualification Framework we call NQF. This session is case-focused. Rather than presenting NCS as a success story only, I will explain what worked, what did not, and why. This perspective is especially important for countries that are considering or already implementing skills frameworks. Many countries face the same challenge. Education and training and qualification and employment do not speak the same language. Korea faced this problem earlier and more urgently due to rapid industrialization and economic crisis. NCS was not introduced as an academic theory, but as a policy solution to our labor market program. Let me briefly explain the structure of today's lecture. First, I will explain why Korea needed a new skills framework. Second, I will clarify what NCS and NKF are, focusing on their policy purpose rather than theory. The third part is the main section of this lecture. Here, I will examine the performance and limitations of NCS across the system. For each area, I will first present the utilization case and then discuss the performance and limitations that followed. We'll cover 6 areas: secondary vocational education, higher vocational education, vocational training, qualification and certification, corporate utilization, and recruitment practices. Finally, I will conclude with policy lessons and implications. With this structure in mind, let me begin with the first question. Why did Korea need a new skills framework? Korea faced the same skills challenges as many countries, but with much greater urgency. Rapid industrialization meant that skills gaps appeared quickly, and their impact on competitiveness was immediate. The turning point was the 1997 Asian financial crisis. This crisis exposed deep structural weaknesses in Korea's labor market and skills system. It was no longer possible to rely on small, incremental reforms. There was strong pressure for labor market reform. As a result, Korea began to redesign its entire TIVA system, rethinking how education, training, and qualifications were connected to employment. This moment marked the shift from fragmented adjustments to comprehensive system reform. This slide shows how the NCS system evolved in Korea. In 1997, Korea established the legal foundation through the Framework Act on Qualifications, in Korean 자격기본법. This created the basis for national qualifications system. However, in 22, Korea developed dual standards. The Ministry of Labor introduced the National Occupation Standards, we call NOS, while the Ministry of Education developed the Korea Skills Standard, we call KSS. As a result, skills standards became fragmented across ministries. To address this problem, two systems were merged in 2010 into a single framework, we call NCS, National Competence Standards. Then, in 2013, NCS was evaluated to a national agenda as part of Korea's strategy to build a competence-based society. In short, NCS did not appear suddenly. It was the result of a long process from fragmentation to integration. This slide, the TIVAT as economic policy, not education policy. This slide shows a fundamental shift in how Korea defined TIVAT. When TIVAT is treated as education policy, the focus is on input, how many curriculum hours are delivered, what qualifications teachers hold, and whether facilities meet formal standards. However, Korea realized that this input-focused approach was not enough. So, TIVAT was framed as economic policy. In this approach, the focus shifts to output, whether graduates can actually perform in real workplaces, whether training improves productivity, whether skills match labor market demand, and whether industries become more competitive. This reframing changed everything. Governance moved toward cross-ministry coordination. Funding became linked to employment outcomes. Quality was measured by competence, not seat time, and industry, not academic alone, began to shape standards. In short, vocational education and training were no longer seen. This slide, the two-track structure, let me explain. This slide explains Korea's two-track TVET structure. Korea operates two distinct but parallel systems, vocational education and vocational training. Vocational education is managed by the Ministry of Education. Its primary focus is formal education, credentials, and academic progression. The core mission is to prepare young people for career entry through structured learning combined with general education. In contrast, vocational training part is managed by the Ministry of Employment and Labor. Its focus is employability, job performance, and workforce adjustment. The core mission is to develop specific job competencies for employment, re-employment, and skills upgrading. These two systems are designed for specialization, but this specialization also creates a strong need for coordination. This is where NCS plays a critical role. NCS functions as a bridge between the two tracks, providing one common competence language. In short, Korea maintains two different pathways, but connect them through a shared competence framework. This slide, let me explain the coordination problem. Even with institutional specializations, Korea's dual system created serious coordination problems. Education and training operated in parallel, but as disconnected worlds, each with its own logic and language. Education had its own curricular standards and credentials. Training had its own programs, assessments, and certificates. Because there was no common language between the two, several problems emerged. The same skills were taught twice, but in different ways. Industry needs were not reflected consistently. Workers could now transfer credentials across systems, and employers faced multiple certificates with no clear signal of competencies. Korea's response was NCS, one common competence language for both education and training system. This slide summarizes the overall strategy of Korea's TVET reform through NCS. At the bottom of the system are the national competence standards. NCS serves as the foundation for all VET reform efforts. Based on NCS, both vocational education, vocational training were redesigned. Although these two tracks remain institutionally separate, they now share the same competence framework. On top of this dual system, new qualifications based on NCS were developed. These qualifications were intended to link learning outcomes to real workplace competencies. The ultimate goal was to move beyond education and training alone toward competence-driven outcomes. This includes competence-based employment, ways, and promotion systems linked to a competency, and career development based on demonstrated skills. In short, NCS was designed to support the system, support a shift toward a competence-driven society. Let me explain what NCS is. This slide explains what NCS actually is. NCS, or National Competence Standard, is not an academic theory. It is a policy definition designed to solve coordination problems in the labor market. Officially, NCS defines the knowledge, skills, and attitudes required to perform work, systemized by the nation according to industry sector and competence level. The core purpose of NCS is to reduce mismatch between work and education, training and qualification, and industry demand and workforce supply. To do this, NCS uses national classification structure. Jobs are organized from the broad categories down to specific key work functions, and each unit includes clear performance criteria. Based on this structure, NCS is applied across the system in education and training curricula, in qualifications and assessment. And in industry, HR practice such as recruitment and career development. In short, NCS functions as a common competence language connecting education, training, qualifications, and employment. Let me explain two types of competencies in NCS. This slide explains that NCS is built on two distinct but complementary types of competencies. First are key competencies. Common, we call the in Korean 직업기초 능력. Nowadays we call soft skills. These are foundation skills required across all occupations regardless of industry. They include communication skills, problem-solving skills, self-development skills, interpersonal skills, and professional attitudes like that. These competencies are transferable and universal, and they support labor mobility across jobs and sectors. Second part is job-specific competencies, in Korean 직무 수행 능력. These are technical skills unique to a particular occupation or job function. They are defined through detailed competence units validated by industry experts and assessed using clear performance criteria. These competencies are specialized and technical, and they support industrial specialization and productivity. The key point is this: neither type of sufficient in its own. It NCS key competencies and job-specific competencies together form a complete work profile. Both layers are required for NCS-based curriculum design, qualification systems, and skills-based recruitment. This slide explains the basic building block of NCS called the competence unit. NCS is not one large description of an occupation. It is a set of many competence units. I think the number is over 13,000, each representing a specific part of job performance. A competence unit starts with a unit description, which summarizes the work environment, purpose, and scope of the task in one sentence. Each unit is then broken down into competence elements, which describe the key sub-competencies required to perform the work. Next are performance criteria. These clearly define what level or result a person must demonstrate to be considered competent. The application range specifies the conditions under which the work is performed, including a physical and environmental context. Finally, assessment guidance explains how and where the competence should be evaluated. In short, a competence unit translates work into observable, assessable performance, which can be used consistently across education, training, and qualification. This slide shows a real example of an NCS competency unit. The title of this unit is Budget Planning Guidelines Development. It defines a specific competence required in administrative and financial roles. At the top, you see the definition. This clearly explains what the work must be able to do: analyze past performance, benchmark indicators, and finalize budget guidelines for rational budgeting. Below that are the competence unit elements. In this example, one element is analyze the past performance. For each element, NCS specifies performance criteria. These describe concrete actions such as collecting account data, comparing planned and actual budget, and conducting various analyses. At the bottom, the competence is broken into knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Knowledge includes accounting and budget regulations. Skills include using accounting problems and spreadsheet. Attitudes include analytical thinking, and collaboration. Together, these three components form a complete competence profile. This example shows how NCS translates work into clear, accessible, and teachable unit. This slide continues the same NCS competence unit, focusing on application range and assessment. At the top, you see the applicant range and work conditions. This section specifies the real-world context in which the competency is applied, the type of financial statement used, benchmarking indicators considered, and the tools and documents required to perform the task. In other words, NCS does not describe skills in abstraction. It defines where, how, and under what conditions, such as variance analysis, benchmarking, and the ability to finalize budget guidelines. This example shows the NCS linked performance, context, and assessment into one coherent system. This slide introduced the Industry Skills Council, we call ISC, in Korean 산업별 인적자원개발위원회. ISCs are industry-led bodies responsible for ensuring that NCS reflects real workplace needs. Each council represents a major industry sector such as manufacturing, construction, IT, design, energy, and service. These councils are not academic organizations. They are led by industry associations and employers with direct knowledge of changing skills demands. The core role of ISC is threefold. First, they define industry skills needs. Second, they develop and continuously update NCS. And third, they bridge industry and education so that training and qualifications stay relevant. In short, ISCs are the mechanism that connect NCS to real labor market demand. They ensure that NCS is not a theoretical standard but a living framework shaped by industry. This slide explains the 8-level competence structure of NCS. These levels do not represent academic degrees. They describe how much autonomy, responsibility, and complexity a worker can handle in real work settings. From level 1 to 3, focus on task execution. Workers reform routine to complex tasks, moving from close supervision to independent judgment. From level 4 and 5 represent technical expertise and leadership at the workplace level. Here, workers take responsibility for specialized tasks and begin managing team or project. From level 6 to 8, shift from execution to strategy and influence. These levels involve organization, decision-making, cross-functional leadership, and industry-wide authority. In short, the NCS level system maps career progression through work capability, not through time served or the academic credentials. This is why NCS was designed to support competence-based careers and lifelong progression. Okay, and this slide shows the classification system of an NCS. NCS organization organized the entire world of work into a 4-level structure. It starts with 24 broad industry categories, which are further divided into 81 groups and 273 sets. This number is at the moment 2026. At the most detailed level, NCS defines about 1,100 key work functions, which represent concrete job tasks performed in the workplace. This structure allows Korea to describe jobs not by job titles, but by actual work functions and required competencies. Because of this classification, education, training, qualification, and recruitment can all be aligned using the same occupational language. In other words, the National Competence Standard NCS classification system works as a common reference map connecting industry, education, and the labor market. Okay, the next part is National Qualification Framework. This slide explains the core idea of the National Qualification Framework, or the NQF. The NQF is not built around a single pathway such as formal education. Instead, it is designed to integrate multiple learning and career pathways into one national recognition system. Training programs, academic diplomas, work experience, certificates, and even prior learning experiences are all treated as valid sources of competence. What matters here is not where a person learned, but what that person is actually able to do. All of these different pathways are connected and recognized through common NQF system level descriptors, which are themselves based on the National Competence Standards, or NCS. In this sense, in the NQF system, the functions as a translation mechanism. It translates the diverse learning experience into a common language of competence levels that can be understood by education providers, employers, and the labor market. So the NQF represents a shift from a credential-centered system to a competence-centered recognition system. But NQF is a very ideal framework, so we try to develop the sector qualification framework. 자, this slide explains what the standards quality framework. This is sector qualification framework, SQF, is why it plays an important role in Korea's skills system. SQF is an industry-based framework that standardization the jobs commonly used in each industry and structures the competency required for the job's performance. It is developed based on national competence standards, we call NCS, and functions as a bridge that connects education and training, academic degree, qualification, and work experience. Through SQF, workers can be recognized as having an equivalent level of capability, even if their learning pathways are different. In other words, a person who gained skills through formal education, another through vocational training, and another through work experience can be evaluated and recognized at the same level as long as their competencies meet the same standards. This is why SQF emphasized outcomes rather than pathways. At the policy level, SQF development comes first, and then SQF applied models are developed and implemented across. Okay. All right. So ultimately, SQF enables equivalent recognition of degrees, qualification, experience, and training results by translating them into NCS-based competence levels. This allowing in industries, education providers, and employers to speak the same language when evaluating skills. This session starts with limitations, not success. Korea's NCS is often presented as a successful reform. In many ways, that is true. But however, real policy learning begins not by focusing on success, but by understanding where and why it did not fully work. This leads to a key question. If NCS is well designed, why do gaps still exist across education, training, and employment? In education, the issue is curriculum alignment. In training, it is the gap between completion and actual application. In employment, it is signaling versus employer trust. The problem is not the design of NCS. It is implementation, incentives, and weak connections between systems. That is why this session starts with the limitations. In secondary vocational education, let me explain first. NCS was applied in a very concrete and structured way. First, curriculum was restructured around the NCS competence units with job task-centered subjects introduced across specialized high schools. Second, NCS linked textbooks and learning modules were developed with performance criteria embedded and authorized at the national level. Third, teacher training focused on the industry exposure and NCS-based industrial design skills. Fourth, competence assessment shifted to performance-based evaluation linked to NQF levels and evolving industry assessors. Through strong industry linkage and the Meister High School model, students combined learning with real workplace experience. As a result, NCS alignment increased, employer satisfaction improved, and skills mismatch was significantly reduced. This case shows how NCS works best when curriculum, teaching, assessment, and employment are fully connected. But in secondary vocational education, students complete as NCS-based curriculum, yet employers still say graduates are not fully job ready. There were clear achievements. Learning outcomes became more explicit and were directly linked to occupational standards. Students also developed a stronger awareness of job-related competencies. However, important limitations remain. Most skills were still developed in school settings rather than tested in real workplaces. Exposure to real work context was limited, and many teachers struggled to translate abstract standards to practical tasks. The key lesson is simple. Alignment on paper does not automatically mean readiness in reality. And let me explain higher education, higher vocational education utilization. In higher vocational education, usually it's college, junior college, community college, NCS was applied more systematically and produced career research. Universities used NCS as a standard process for curriculum design, operation, and review. Industry demand was directly embedded, helping students build job-relevant competencies. Quality management system continuous feedback loops strengthened curriculum consistency and employment outcomes. From the industry side, hiring shift toward job-centered and competence-based practices. University industry cooperation improved and companies reduced training costs. The overall impact was clear. Employee satisfaction increased, skills mismatch declined, and NCS-based graduates earned more and stayed longer in their jobs. However, in higher vocational education, NCS has helped to redesign curricular and improve industry relevance on paper, making programs more structured and competence-based. However, industrial quality remains uneven. Adoption is often partial rather than transformative, and employers tend to recognize the program title without fully trusting the actual competencies produced, which ultimately raises a critical question: who truly validates and trusts these competencies in the labor market? Let me explain the vocation training part. In vocational training, NCS was introduced to address the gap between training and real workplaces by strengthening industry relevance, simplifying fragmented support systems, and shifting the focus from credentials to actual competencies, leading to concrete changes such as NCS-based curriculum and module design, integrated classification and cost standards, closer alignment between work, training, and qualifications, and transition from outcome-only completion check toward process and competence-based evaluation. However, In vocational training part, NCS has clarified competence units and training objectives and strengthening monitoring and accountability, but success is still measured mainly by course completion rather than workplace application. Links to real job performance remain weak. Employers continue to train new hires, and this reveals a core insight that training without actual utilization does not result in real skill frame development. In the qualification system part, the anxious shift assessment from simple pass-fail exam result to the process-based design centered on competence unit, restructured the theory-based subject into measurable skills unit tracked over time, and expanded quality assurance beyond the exam items to include full process monitoring and external evaluation, thereby linking qualification more closely to continuous skill development and long-term career pathways rather than one-time test performance. However, many individuals today hold multiple qualifications, yet employers still conduct their own assessment. Qualifications do improve transparency and consistency across systems, but their signaling power has weakened because they often reflect time spent rather than ability demonstrated. As credentials increase, trust tends to decrease, creating a core tension between certification and credibility. This is why employers look beyond the certificates and focus on real performance. Let me explain in corporate part, HR part. In corporate HR, NCS is utilized across the entire employer life cycle. It is first applied in hiring system by developing NCS-based competence assessment tools that support skill-first, spec-free recruitment through aptitude tests and structured interviews. It is then used in service training by building internal career pathways and NCS-linked training programs that emphasize field-centered on-the-job learning. NCS also supports placement and promotion decisions through job-centered checklists aligned with NCS levels, helping reduce mismatches between organization expectations and employee competencies. In compensation, NCS-based job analysis enables companies to redesign wage structure by job function and level, shifting from seniority-based pay to competence-linked compensation. Ultimately, when fully integrated, NCS functions as a comprehensive HR system that connects training, evaluation, placement, promotion, and compensation under a constant and transparent skills framework. However, in many Korean companies, NCS is used mainly for job descriptions but not for evaluation, promotion, or reviews. This has improved job analysis and clarified roles, and it has helped HR departments plan training in a more systematic way. However, in practice, adoption often remains symbolic or selective. NCS is difficult to embed it into real HR decision making, especially in performance evaluation and compensation, and existing HR practice tend to resist change. This leads to a critical question. If NCS helps define work so clearly, why does its use stop at documentation rather than extending into actual HR decision? Especially, let me explain the recruitment section. In a traditional spec-centered recruitment system, job posting focus on GPA, SAT GPA like that, 수능, the score, certificates, language scores, and overseas experience, while resume were screened based on academic background rather than job relevance. Written tests measure general aptitude that is not directly related to actual work, and interviews are often unstructured, subjective, and influenced by first expression. In contrast, In an NCS-based recruitment process redesigned every stage around the job competencies, a job posting clearly defined duties and required skills using NCS unit. Application forms emphasize competence-based introductions, and relevant work experience. Written tests assess real job task performance and situational judgment, and interviews follow structured competence-based criteria. As a result, recruitment shifted from filtering people by specification to selecting candidates based on their demonstrated ability to perform a job. However, even when companies adopt skills-based job descriptions, final hiring decisions are often still influenced by degrees and school names. This shift has improved clarity around the job requirements and in some cases reduced the reliance on vague credential filters. However, serious limitations remain. There is a lack of reliable tools to assess competencies. Employers continue to prefer familiar traditional signals, and adoption of skills-based hiring is inconsistent across firms. The critical insight is that skills-based hiring cannot succeed on descriptions alone. It requires a trusted infrastructure for assessing, validating, and comparing skills in real hiring decisions. Across all these cases, the limitations share the same underlying pattern. Education, training, qualifications, and corporate HR systems operate in silos with no shared language and no shared accountability. Firms have limited incentive to use skills information drawn from the external standards, so adoption becomes a matter of compliance rather than real integration. Even when standards exist, there is no strong mechanism linking them to actual hiring, evaluation, promotion, or real decisions. The core problem, therefore, is not the absence of standards, but the absence of connections. While NCS successfully created a common skills language, the infrastructure needed to translate the language into incentives, trust, utilization, and feedback loops was never fully built. So the NCS needs to be reframed from what it has traditionally been to what it can truly become. Instead of being treated as a technical standard, a curriculum guideline, an administrative checklist, or a compliance document, NCS should function as a shared competence language that is understood across education, training, and labor market. Its real value lies in serving as a signaling mechanism that makes skills visible, comparable, and credible, and in linking those skills directly to performance, evaluation, and viewers. When used this way, NCS becomes more than a standard to comply with. It becomes an infrastructure for trust, a system that allows skills to be recognized, valued, and acted upon in real decisions. Finally, across all of these limitations, a common pattern emerges. Education, training, qualifications, and corporate HR systems operate in separate silos, with neither a shared language nor the shared accountability. Firms have little incentive to actively use skills information derived from the external standards, which leads NCS to be treated as a compliance requirement rather than an integrated decision-making tool. As a result, even though standards exist, there is no strong mechanism connecting them to real actions such as hiring, evaluation, promotion, or careers. The key message is clear. The problem is not absence of standards, but the absence of connections. While NCS successfully created a common skills language, the infrastructure needed to uh, translate that language into incentives, trust, utilization, and feedbacks and loops was never fully built. Thank you for listening.